Hi everyone, hello to those joining us online. My name is Danielle Buckner and I'm a career advisor in the Carson Center for Student Success in the Carson College of Business. So today we're going to be talking about salary negotiation. And first I would like to start with 3 goals for today. So these are the 3 goals that I have for us that we will be able to, by the end of tonight, know where to find salary information in your industry, understand how to leverage salary information in your negotiation, and learn techniques for successfully negotiating salary and benefit packages, as well as just a little bit into promotion negotiations as well. And for our online campus, if you have any questions already that you know that you want to ask and hope that we address, if you can go ahead and just start typing those up. At the end, we're going to answer all questions, but that is something that we will look at the end, and I just want to make sure that we're addressing everything. Okay. So we're first going to start with what your role and responsibilities are going to be in a salary negotiation. So first, when is it even appropriate to start negotiating? So looking at salary and benefits first with a negotiation, that's going to be after you receive a job offer. So with salary and benefits in your interviews, typically you'll have a first round interview, maybe a second, sometimes third or fourth round interviews. And usually towards the later stages of those interviews, you might start hearing what the salary is going to look like, what the benefits are going to look like, things like that. It is still not appropriate to start talking about that and start negotiating those offers until you've actually received the job offer and you know for sure that you've received a job offer and you know that you can actually have that negotiation, have it go somewhere. You don't want to start negotiating in an interview when another candidate maybe hasn't done that. And so they might just go with another candidate because they know the different negotiations that you already have in your mind. Promotions negotiation, so this is like either receiving a promotion at work or a pay raise negotiation. Those could come about in 2 different ways. So one would be after you've already received a promotion, you've already been granted that, and you want to start negotiating benefits, salary, maybe a title change, maybe your office location changing, anything like that. That would be appropriate after you've already received the promotion. Another option is if you haven't received that promotion, but you really want to start looking at a pay raise. If you've been there for at least a year in that position and you are consistently exceeding and not just meeting those expectations, that would be another appropriate time. So definitely, like if it's been less than a year, that's probably not an appropriate time to start that negotiation. And then if you're just meeting expectations, so take a really good hard long look at your job description and what that looks like. And if you're meeting those, that still may not be an appropriate time for a promotion negotiation, but if you're consistently exceeding it, that would be a good time to start having that conversation with your supervisor. So once you've kind of thought about your salary negotiation and decide that it is appropriate to maybe start negotiating that, there's a couple of resources of where you can start finding that information. So I've listed just 3 right now. There's plenty of other resources out there. My favorite is NACE. That stands for National Association of Colleges and Employers. That's the association that I'm most closely aligned with. So I use them a lot, but there are 2 other resources and we'll kind of take a look at that. So starting with NACE, and you can just calculate or put in Google NACE salary calculator and it will pop this up for you. What I like about this, and let me see if I can zoom in a little bit. Okay, this makes it much easier to see. So what I like about this is that you can actually like fine tune it pretty easily from right here. So let's say we are looking to research salaries in Washington. I'm going to put Washington, and then you can select even the geographical region. So let's say we're looking at Seattle area, and then you can type in an occupation. So since we are in the Carson College of Business right now, I'm going to start with business, but later we can always discuss other career paths as well. So let's say we are looking into human resources. It's going to pop up with some suggestions right below it. So let's say human resource specialist. So now you're going to select the number of years of relevant work experience that you already have. So for most of our Pullman campus students, I would say it's probably going to be either less than 1 to 5 years. For some of our online campus, you may have more experience. To kind of go on the middle ground, I'm going to look at the 1 to 5 years. And then the highest level of education that you've achieved. So most of us, that's going to be your bachelor's degree. And one thing to note too is that when you are doing applications or when you're looking at salary negotiations and you think, well, I haven't completed my bachelor's degree yet, so it's high school, you can still go with bachelor's degree because likely by the time that you're hired, that's going to be what you're going to have. So you can always go with that, and even on your applications, as a side note, you can always put your bachelor's degree as the highest level if that's something that you will have before you start the job. So then select the state that you attended school. So we're going to do Washington State University, and you can actually even break it out by the other campuses as well. Selecting a major, so we're going to do business. And then how relevant is your degree to the job that you are targeting? So ideally it's going to be directly relevant, but if not, you can select the other options as well. And then if you received a degree, what is your grade point average? So I'm just going to go with a 3.0. So then you submit it, and it's going to give you some pretty detailed information, which can really help you in your salary negotiation. So right now, what it's saying right here is that there are over 8,000 people in Seattle who are employed as human resource specialists currently, that the starting salaries are around $42,000. The median is around $68,000, so what the majority of people are at. And the top earners have over $121,000. So what this means for you is it then targets, based off of all that information that you just put into the NAE salary calculator, you're looking at probably around $61,500 as your starting salary, not including compensation or benefits or anything like that. So one caveat, so I chose 1 to 5 years, right? So if you have 1.5, 2 years, you're probably looking at a little bit less than that $61,500. This is probably more on the 4 to 5 years experience. So keeping that in mind, you know that you're above the starting salary that they're posting for Seattle, but you're still below that median and maybe even just slightly below what they've just estimated for you. So that is one resource that I use. And I also encourage not just using one resource, but using multiple and kind of compiling that information however you do that, whether that's jotting down notes, typing it up in an Excel document, whatever you use to kind of compile your research is going to be super beneficial. So you've started with this. Let's go on to salary.com. So salary.com looks a little bit different. So you can put in what job you are looking for. So I'm going to put in, to kind of give a different context, my current job. So let's say career advisor. Location, let's say Pullman, Washington, because I want to stay working in Pullman, Washington. Pull that up, search. It will give you a whole bunch of different job titles. So right here I see career services director, career counselor, academic advisor. I can click on multiple of them and then compare them up here at the top, right up here. So that's how you can compare them. If you just want to look at one that is most specific to you, so let's say career counselor for me, if I click on that, it will give me some pretty good data on Pullman, Washington career counselors. So on years of experience over there, it's basically telling me that the majority of career counselors in Pullman have 2 to 5 years of experience. On the education level, most of them have a master's degree, and then it will even break it down by company size and industry. So that's also some relevant information to know. But then to look at the salary specifically, you just click on free salary data right up here. You can skip the advertisements. And then it will give you this bell curve. So this bell curve at the very top is the median range. So for career advisors in Pullman, it's around 42,000. They have the lower end being 34,000 and the high end being 52,000. So that gives you the low end to the high end to the median, all that information. So again, taking that with your other research, compiling that, seeing if it compares for the geographical regions that you're looking into. So one last place that I'm going to show you guys is Glassdoor. So if you look at Glassdoor, I'm going to type in another business type job. So let's say sales, sales manager. And this time let's look in maybe Spokane. And here you can look for jobs too, but we're going to look at salaries. So when you come to here, it shows you the national average and then Spokane's average. So Spokane is a little bit lower than the national average for sales managers in Spokane. And then it can actually show you by company. So at Macy's, about 43 to 49,000. JCPenney's 46 to 50. So you can actually target it by company here on Glassdoor. So you can even compare that if you're looking at multiple different companies to have a negotiation for in the future. So again, compiling all of that information to use it to your advantage. So pulling this back up. So how is having all of this information, the low end to the median to the high end, for the geographical regions, for the different job titles, for the different education, how is all of that relevant and useful? Well, once you know that, you know what you're negotiating into. You're not blind to what they're going to probably expect and offer you. You kind of have a range to work with already. And then you can assess your own skills, experience, and education and see if that matches up. You know, are you going to be at the top end of that range because your experience exceeds what the typical salary looks like for an entry-level position? Or are you going to be towards the bottom half? Maybe you just graduated and you really don't have too much experience yet. So once you know that, you know whether you're working on the bottom half or the top half and what your range for a negotiation is going to look like. So now, looking at the employer side, it's helpful to see what they're going to be thinking about. So one, knowing the company's guidelines. So there are typically three structures that companies fall into when they are offering salaries. One is the fixed offer, and that is where a company provides you a salary and it is take it or leave it. They have pretty little wiggle room to negotiate, and that's coming from their higher ups. They cannot just say, yep, sure, I'm going to give you a higher salary. They have operations that they're working in, and that's where they operate from. That doesn't mean that benefits are completely out of the discussion for negotiations. Sometimes with a fixed offer, the salary is fixed, but you can still negotiate benefits. So that's maybe a question to consider, and knowing that company and where they're at. The next one is the most common one, especially for business majors, and that's a pay grade structure. So that is where a company offers you a salary, but they're working within that range that we kind of just talked about. And you can negotiate up, and they can probably negotiate down too, within that pay grade. So they have a range that they're working off of, and you are negotiating within that range. And as long as you know that range and you're not trying to negotiate higher than what they can offer, there's some wiggle room within that. Then there's the open structure. So this one is pretty rare, but this is where the hiring manager has all authority, and you can negotiate as high as you want, and potentially they can offer you that without having to go through their higher ups and the bureaucracies to offer that. Kind of a middle ground with that. Sometimes there's kind of like a half open where you can negotiate that, but they still have to take it back to their supervisor, get it approved, and then signed off on. So it's kind of in the in-between. It's still not necessarily within that pay grade, but those ones are kind of rare. Okay, so now you know the company's guidelines, you have all of your research. How do you leverage that information? So first, deciding, are they in that fixed state? And so you're probably not going to be able to have that salary negotiation, or if so, it's going to be about benefits. If you decide that they're operating on the pay grade or the open, then you can probably go ahead and start thinking about negotiating. So some tips. You want to have a goal in mind. So if you are thinking that you're maybe in a lower end range of there's the 35 to 47,000 range that you're operating within, and you think you're on the lower half, but your goal is maybe 43,000. That's your end goal. That's what you hope to get out of this. So having that goal. You're going to want to start above that goal, and not with a price point, but with a range. So let's say 43,000 is your goal. So you might have a range of 45 to 47 that you start off with. And then when you're counteracted, just explain how you would bring value to the company and how your skills relate. You definitely don't want to start going down the rabbit hole of, in this geographical area, I need more money to pay rent or pay this. You don't want to talk about that. You want to talk about the skills and value that you're bringing to that company. So really, with my experience and with my consistency in bringing in more recruits to your company, I think giving me a higher salary is actually, potentially saving you money because I can bring in so many helpful recruits. So kind of framing it in that way. What is a win-win situation for you all? So giving you a higher salary is also a win for the company because you're bringing in more money, more recruits, more whatever it may be. So think about it that way when you're negotiating. So some other tips and techniques. So you always want to start off with a statement that is not offensive. You don't want to offend them with the offer that they've already provided you. So one thing that you could always say is, thank you so much for this offer. I'm really excited to have this job offer. I do want to talk about some of the benefits that are associated with the salary that you have offered. So you kind of open the door, you're going to start having a negotiation. Maybe you're starting with the benefits, but you really want to have a conversation on that salary. Never get defensive or argumentative. So sometimes the employer will not be so kind or just not use words that you are hoping to hear. But you don't want to get defensive or argumentative. You just want to take it in stride and again relate it back to the skills and value. Well, thank you so much for letting me know about that structure and where you think I fall in that range. But here, let me tell you about some more skills and things like that. So again, relating it back to skills and the value. So starting high, we talked about, but within a reasonable range. So again, if you know that you're operating within a range where the high end is going to be $50,000, you don't want to start above that $50,000 and start negotiating from there because it's just not going to happen. And it kind of looks like you didn't do research because this information is pretty accessible. Like we just saw 3 different websites where you can find all of the salary information. So if you go in and you start negotiating way too high, they're going to know that you didn't do your research. And so that's one thing that you want to know is what is a reasonable range, starting higher than your goal, but not too high for the company. And then when you're counteracted, so let's say we use our example, you're starting with that $45,000 to $47,000 range, you want to start working there, and they say, well, within our company, we really want to start at that $35,000 to $37,000. How about we offer you a $38,000 salary? So now, it's dropped down quite a bit. You've been talking about the 45 to 47, they've offered you a 38. So how do you negotiate now? You don't want to jump back up to that 45 to 47. Your goal was 43, so that's okay. So now you're going to lower it down and just counteract them with about a $1,000 to $2,000 difference. So they've talked to you about a $38,000 salary. You might say, well, I'm thinking about a $40,000 to $41,000. Can we work from there? So you're not jumping too far high up again, but you're coming back down, meeting them where they're at. They've kind of given you a price point, and you can start negotiating from there. Sometimes it can go back and forth for a little while. Sometimes it's pretty clear that they're not moving on from that number. So once you've gotten to that point where you think, this negotiation is not going very much further on salary, you want to start considering the benefits, the packages that come with it, moving, relocation, anything else that might be supplemental. So some companies will even offer a signing bonus. So, we can't really budge on our salary, but we can offer you a $2,000 signing bonus right up front. So you get $2,000 as your paycheck right up front. So even negotiating that is a possibility. Negotiating your benefits, if they have different benefit packages, and usually they offer one to people who've been in the field for 1 to 5 years, and you think, well, I have the experience that's kind of closer to that 5-year mark, can I get the higher benefits package? That might be something you can negotiate as well. And moving relocation is a pretty popular one that I think a lot of people forget about. If you're moving from pretty far away for this company, and the salary isn't too high, or you weren't able to negotiate it, and maybe you don't get a signing bonus, a moving relocation package can definitely be beneficial, and it's something to definitely ask about. So that's one thing. Another tip that I have that's not on here is to remember that if you don't negotiate, you don't know what you're losing out on. But if you negotiate, you really don't have much to lose. I think there's a lot of fear in the fact that, I have this job offer, and if I negotiate, I could lose that job offer. Likely, if they, especially if you've gone through the interview process and you've been really connecting with this employer, likely that's not the case. It's probably a win-win scenario, again, if you can talk about it in that way. So just negotiating it isn't going to hurt you. It's the way that you negotiate. So just making sure that you're keeping it positive, adding value and skills, and not getting defensive or argumentative, and you're probably not going to lose out on that job offer by negotiating. So it really can only benefit you than it can hurt you, but if you don't ask, you'll never know what you could have gotten out of it. Okay, so inappropriate negotiations. So something that you want to stay away from. So you never want to state that you're receiving a higher offer from another company and leverage it that way. Well, this company is going to give me X amount of dollars, so really I think we should start from there. That's not a good way to go. You may win a battle or two that way, but it's really going to start damaging your reputation, and it's going to burn bridges at other companies. So you kind of want to stay away from that. Now, maybe you are really receiving a higher offer from another company, and that's something that you want to leverage. Keep that again in the back of your mind. Use it in your research. Put it in your notes. Do a pros and cons. But don't bring that up in the salary negotiation. And then you kind of know in the back of your mind, should I go with this other company because it's going to be much more meaningful? Or maybe the salary is higher at that other company, but you're getting much better benefits and moving, relocation, and signing bonuses from the other company. So use it as a pros and cons, but don't use it as a leveraging tool in your negotiation. And then the last thing is like a take it or leave it stance on your part. So a company is fair to have a take it or leave it stance on their part. They can offer you a salary and it's take it or leave it. On your part, it's definitely not appropriate to say, well, I want $47,000, you're going to offer it to me or I'm not going to take the job. That's definitely not a stance that you want to have. That will probably lose you out on job offers. So I would stay away from a take it or leave it stance, and again, just kind of work within the salary ranges, negotiating, which is compromising and things like that. So going back to the employer side, hopefully you've had a successful negotiation, you've been able to maybe work through the salary, if not benefits and moving packages and things like that. After the negotiation, you always want to get it in writing. So you may have had a very extensive talk with this employer, you felt that it really went well, the employer has agreed to X, Y, and Z, but you don't have it in writing on your offer letter. That is a big warning sign. You definitely want to get it in writing, because once you sign that offer, your negotiation is over, and that is the proof that they have of what they've talked about with you. So if on the offer it tells you that your salary is something different than what you've negotiated, you definitely want to bring that up with the employer. It could be as simple as they just forgot to retype it up when they were sending it out to you, and so just asking them, hey, we talked about this salary or this benefits, can we get that put into the offer? And it shouldn't be a problem. If it's not that they just forgot about it, it's definitely a conversation you're going to want to have with them. But again, if it's not on that offer letter and you sign it, your negotiation is over, and likely you're not going to get any of the things that you had been talking about. So we're going to start our conclusion, and then we're going to kind of go into some question and answers, because I feel like with salary negotiation, there's a bunch of information, but it's more realistic to have a conversation about scenarios. Maybe some of you have been through a negotiation. So I'm going to give some final concluding points. So you really want to do your research to know what salary range you fall in for whatever position it's applying for whatever company it is, in whatever geographical area, with your skills, experience, and education. So all of that is super, super important. You want to know the position, the company, the geography, skills, experience, education, all of that, to know your range and what's realistic. Because even in the same geographical area with the same skills, experience, and education, the company differs. And so the company might offer a different salary range. So knowing that is helpful. Again, making it a win-win scenario. So what they're offering you as a salary is going to help benefit them as well. And then getting it in writing. Okay. So if you ever want to find some more information, this is where I got some of my resources. But now I'd like to open it up for discussion. So I know Online Campus may already have some questions coming in. If not, you definitely have time for that. Does anyone have any questions so far? Yeah, Ping.
Is it ever okay to negotiate through email, or is it always should be a phone call or in person?
That's a great question. I would say, so the question was, can you negotiate via email, or is it better to have it on a phone call or in a personal conversation? I would say email is really impersonal. I would recommend, if it is coming through email from the employer side, to recommend a couple times that you could have a phone call conversation with them, or if you're local, to meet up with them. I definitely wouldn't try to have it in an email chain. The positive of that, though, is that you do have it in writing coming in, so that's helpful. So maybe, if they don't end up sending you an offer letter, maybe the company doesn't operate that way, getting it in an email after that conversation can definitely be helpful. Yeah.
All right, we have a couple questions from the global campus. The first is, which pay structure is most commonly available at companies?
Yeah. So the question was, which pay structure is more commonly available at companies? And so I would say, let's go back to that. It's very far away. So for business companies specifically, I would say the pay grade is the most common, and then fixed offer, and then the open. So pay grade being the one where you can negotiate, but within a range. That's usually the most common.
Are
Our next question is, how do you know what pay grade your company has?
Yeah, so that's something that you can do research on to find out what pay grade the company has. So you can do a Google search and see. Usually sometimes people are even writing reviews on the company and talking about that. So you can find through reviews of others. One way that I would recommend above all else is going on LinkedIn and see if you have connections at that company already. So LinkedIn is a huge resource. If you're not on LinkedIn, I recommend it. But if you have connections, when you go to that company's website, you're going to see on the side followers of that company or people who work for that company and what degree of a connection they are. If you have a first degree connection, it's probably a safe bet that you know them pretty well and that you can contact them. And I would ask them, just start asking questions. That can also help you do some of your research. So, you know, especially if they're part of the hiring process or have been through that recently, they can probably address some of those questions that you might have. If you don't have a first degree connection, but you have a second degree, get introduced, and that can also help you with getting a job offer as well. So when you're being introduced to someone who works for that company, you're building up their company references, you're able to start talking to them and get more information, get your foot in the door, and then hopefully learn some more of that information. Yeah.
Our next question is, what questions are you allowed to ask about benefits or salary when you're in the interview process before a job offer? Like, for example, if they don't have it listed on the posting.
Yeah. So when you're in an interview, so it's before you've received the job offer and you're trying to figure out what benefits or salary they offer at that company because it hasn't come up in a discussion yet. Typically what I would recommend is not asking that in an interview, at least not in your first interview. If it's a second or third round interview and you feel comfortable asking that at the end when they ask you if you have any questions, you can bring it up. But what I would recommend instead is, again, finding someone who works for that company, talking to people and asking them about it. Hopefully you could also find it on their website. Usually people are pretty open in their hiring practices on their websites. But if not, talking to people who are not a part of that hiring process would be a good way. But if all else fails and that's not happening for you and you are in a second or third round interview, that is a question you can ask towards the end. But I would just be careful about the way you're stating it. So definitely not stating, you know, how much money will I make? You know, something that's a little bit more positive, and maybe just asking, you know, I'm just curious about what the benefits are at your company and things like that. Sometimes you can even ask the employers why they are in the company that they chose, and sometimes that's one of the reasons that they chose that company is because of the benefits and perks of being a part of that company. Great questions.
And then another question is from the global campus, what if you're a consultant, how do you approach this regarding the pay scale? It's hard to know your client's budget when it's an individual or small company.
So can you restate that one? So you're a consultant.
So if you're like a consultant doing independent work and projects, how can you approach negotiating like your fee when it's like an individual or small company that you're working for a limited amount of time?
Gotcha. So not necessarily a salary negotiating, but negotiating your work and pay. That's a great question. I haven't gotten that one before. I would probably, so the way that I'm interpreting this question as a consultant, so you're working for a different company and you're trying to use another company to purchase your services. If you're working for another company as a consultant, I would probably ask your coworkers or colleagues or your mentors and kind of see what it is that they negotiate within that, but I'm not too sure outside of the salary negotiation, benefits negotiation, what that would look like for an independent consultant.
And then is there a suggested limit to how many times you can counteroffer?
That is a great question. So how many times can you counteroffer? So you've negotiated your range, they've brought it down, you've brought it back up, they've brought it back down. How many times can you negotiate? I would say, I mean, my number is always 3. Every person's number is different. I would say 3 times is probably good. You'll probably get a sense from the employer too. Like, so we talked about the 1,000 to 2,000 range. So they've offered you a 35 to 37, you went up high and they brought you back down to 38, and then you went up to maybe the 40,000 range. If they go from 38 to like 38,500 $500 and they're like really doing small incremental amounts, it's probably a good sign that they're not really wanting to go much higher than that. If they're able to go up to your 1,000 mark, so you've said, you know, I'm really looking for that 40 to 41, and they say, well, we can meet you at 39,500 or 40,000 right there, they're probably still in the negotiation works and you can still kind of feel that out. But if they're really doing small incremental amounts, I would say you're probably towards your end of the negotiation. Any other questions from Pullman campus? Okay, so one question I want to throw out there, and I don't know how much time we have. Oh, we're actually halfway through. Okay, so one question that I have for anybody in Pullman or Global Campus would be if any of you have actually done a salary negotiation, benefits negotiation, if you have a scenario, what worked well for you, what didn't work well for you, and kind of sharing experiences, that's kind of the next step that I would like to go. So if anyone from Pullman has that, go ahead and raise your hand. But in the meantime, I would also like to share one piece of advice as well. So this is mainly for the women in the room or at home. Typically, there is a lot of research out there that women in salary negotiations, like we just don't negotiate as much as men do. And a lot of that has to do with, you know, social constructs and things like that, as well as like, I think a lot of times we just don't feel comfortable with it. So for the women in the room and at home, I just want you to start thinking about kind of what we talked about at the beginning. If you don't ask, you're never gonna know what you lose out on. But if you ask, like there's really nothing to lose. So keeping that in mind, like we really need to start having that conversation within salary negotiations. I think a lot of times with the pay wage gap, some of that could be because we're not negotiating, definitely not all of it, not minimizing the fact that there is a wage gap, but some of it could be that we just don't negotiate as much as men, and so we're not getting those higher offers because we're not asking. So that's one thing that I do encourage everyone, just go ahead and start that conversation. When you're at that point and you're ready to make that negotiation, I would recommend, one, doing your research, making it a win-win situation, but definitely start having those conversations. So did anyone have any experiences to share? Perfect.
We had one person in the live chat that said that they actually brought up a non-existent counteroffer from another company during his last salary negotiation. The person didn't know it was a no-no.
Mm-hmm.
And then they said that as far as the counteroffer, the strategy actually worked. After the employer gave the person the offer, the person told her that she'd have to think about it. And then she was told to call her before she accepted the other offer.
Okay, yeah, so that's a great scenario. So this person basically went into a salary negotiation and they did make up a higher offer from a different company and use that as leverage, and it did work in their favor. They did receive a higher offer and the person told them, you know, I'll come back later and like think about it. So yes, it can work sometimes. And I think also, and I could be reading into it, but two, it kind of depends on the company and your relationship with them. So for some of our students, if you've been consistently going to networking nights or meeting with an employer and you've had conversations and you've had internships and you've had lots and lots of conversations with them, sometimes that actually, like, and that's something I probably should have brought up earlier, that is sometimes a conversation you can have because you know them much more than just, you know, you had an interview with them and now you're in a negotiation. You've had those conversations with them over the years. Maybe you've even developed a mentorship with them. Maybe you were really wanting to work for them, but you started looking at other offers and you even told them that. If you're really in that type of position, then sometimes that is even an acceptable thing to do because they know you a little bit more. I would say if it's a complete stranger company, you know, you've had the interview and then you're doing the negotiation, yes, sometimes it can work, but sometimes it can be pretty difficult. But that's a great scenario to share. Any other scenarios? Okay, any final questions? Yeah.
We do have another question in the meantime. The person states, I also worked at many third-party recruiters before getting a full-time offer. They usually ask, so how much do you currently make? Should you answer this question at all or honestly?
That is a great question. So that is a current trend in our field right now, is that recruiters, and typically it's recruiters, not like the hiring manager themselves, but recruiters for companies, asking individuals what their current salary is or what they're making, things like that. And so the question was, should you address that question at all? How do you kind of address that question? I would say yes, addressing the question, because they're asking you that, they do want to hear something from you. There is a lot of research out there on why they're asking that question. Some people think it's because recruiters themselves don't know the field, and so they're trying to base it off of you. That may be accurate some of the time, but I would say most likely the recruiter is just using that information, at least from the recruiters that I've interacted with, to help offer you a better offer, at least some of the time. So they're using that information to know where you've been before, and then using that with the experience and skills and education that you already have that they know about you to give you an offer that is more realistic and aligned with your goals. At least that's the recruiters that I've interacted with. I'm sure there are recruiters out there that they'll take that information, and if that's lower than what they would offer you, they might use it that way. But that kind of opens the door to a salary negotiation, because you've given them that information, they've offered you a really low salary that you're just really not accepting. So now you maybe want to talk about that negotiation and kind of bring in the skills and value that you could add. But I would definitely answer that question because they do want a response from you. And I would answer it as honestly as you can. Yeah. Right here.
What are some appropriate things to say when you're negotiating and you have done research in the company and you find that to close the wage gap between women and men? Like if I'm a woman negotiating for my salary, I know that I was offered a lot lower than maybe the next student that is a male. What are some appropriate things I can say?
Right. So the question is, if you've really done your research and you've dug deep and you know what the typical offer is and you've received a lower offer and you think that maybe it's because you're a woman and that men typically are making more in that company, maybe you've even found that research, what can you appropriately say in that negotiation? I would bring it back to your skills and value and really talk about that. You might even bring in the research. Well, I know someone who started off here and we've had conversations and this is kind of around the range. You definitely want to say what other people are making. But you could say this was their range when they were starting, this is what they were negotiating. I've done some research and I know that usually the starting offer is X, Y, and Z. So with my skills and values and with my education, this is what I think I should be making, and kind of start that negotiation that way. It can be a tricky topic. You definitely don't want to bring into that negotiation well, I see that men are making more money than women, and that can be offensive to the company, especially sometimes if they're not even really cognizant of that and they don't realize that. That might be a conversation later down the road once you're in the company and maybe you're in that hiring role. But in the time being, you definitely don't want to bring that up. So just bringing it back to your skills and education. Yeah.
Bringing back to your current salary, is it appropriate to use your current salary as a negotiation tool? Let's say you're interviewing for a position and they've lowered, or you've gotten the job, but they've offered you a lower salary than you're currently making. Is it appropriate to say that I'm currently making this much money with my skill set? I should be making this or more.
Right. So the question here is that, you have a salary and you were offered another job, and that salary that they're offering you at this new job is lower than what you're currently making. How do you negotiate that way? So yes, it's definitely appropriate to bring that up, especially if it's a real concern, maybe it's in the same geographical location or things are pretty similar or even cost more in that area. That can be a real concern. Again, we don't want to go down the hole of saying, rent costs this much and things like that. But you can definitely bring up, currently I'm making about this much in my job, and I do have this experience, this many years, maybe even bringing in a little bit more of what you can bring to that company. So I'm not sure what your field is and what specialty that is, but whatever you can bring into that company, that would be something that you would want to negotiate more. Yeah.
What are some good ways to frame your skill set that could, trigger a higher salary, get the employer to see your skill set? Words, obviously, traits that you possess.
So let me ask you a question. So what industry would you be going into?
Health and mental health.
Health and mental health. So the question was, what skills can you talk about in a negotiation, and how would you frame them in words that you might use in a negotiation? So basically, using the terms of your field, so the health and mental health field. So whether that be, maybe it's going to be a counseling position, working with counseling patients and things like that. So talking about maybe how many patients you've worked with successfully, leveraging that, maybe leveraging some success stories if you have some, and I mean, some things can be confidential, but things that aren't confidential, sharing some success stories of other people and what people say about your work and your skills and things like that. Bringing that into the conversation can definitely add value, and staying away from the skills like I'm hardworking and I'm dedicated and things like that, but showing them the examples of how that is demonstrated in your field. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We have another question from Global Campus asking, let's say you start a job with a bachelor's and go to school and earn a master's while working at the same company. Is it appropriate to ask for a raise based on improving education, but not necessarily a position?
Great question. So the question being, you started the position right after getting your bachelor's degree, you've worked there, and then you went on and got your master's, and now you kind of want to have that promotion negotiation or that pay raise negotiation, and how appropriate is that? So I would say it's definitely more appropriate because you've gotten that master's. I'm assuming too that with your master's degree, you've been in that position for more than a year, because a master's degree typically takes at least a year, if not longer. So you've definitely worked past, when we went to that promotion slide, you've been there in the year. You have probably exceeded expectations if you're earning your master's and that wasn't required for the job. You're probably also, typically with a master's degree, if you're doing it while you're working, you're probably bringing in a lot of what you're learning in that master's degree into the workforce. So whether nobody has a master's degree there and you're bringing in fresh ideas, or many people do and you're bouncing ideas off of others, you're probably exceeding expectations by thinking a little bit more than what your normal everyday job is going to look like. So yes, it would be appropriate to have that negotiation because you've probably been there over a year and exceeding some expectations. Great question. Are there any thoughts or questions from the audience? I'll give it just a couple more seconds, but that is all I have for you. So for those in Pullman, I have my business card here. For those online, if you want to contact me, my email is just danielle.buckner@wcu.edu, and I can answer questions that way as well, especially for those tuning in later.